Hey guys, what's going on? It's Gunnar here. Welcome back to the channel. You know, it's kind of funny right now. I'm standing in one of my food plots. I got a little fawn here, roughly 40 yards away from me, not even. Just out here shooting a video. Just standing there, doesn't have a care in the world, feeding in this combination of red clover, forage peas, tillage radish, and rye. And it just kind of makes me smile because this is exactly why I'm doing this stuff. It's a difficult concept, understanding why we as hunters want to kill the animals that we try to take as good a care of as we possibly can. And it's a pretty deep thing at the end of the day, this hunting stuff that we do. It's not just about killing, it's about bettering the wildlife, the properties that we're having the opportunity to manage and improve, and then making, at the end of the day, making the lives of the animals and the wildlife that live on that property that much better. So just something I kind of wanted to get on my chest right now watching this. I came out here last night, the same exact plot, and took a video of a little rabbit nibbling on all my forage that I've got going on here. It's just cool to see. The plan in place, all of the hard work working out, right? But today I'm not talking food plots today, but I want to kind of go over, there was a concept that I heard a number of years ago, and it was roughly when I first started taking hunting serious. Now, I don't know if that was 12, 13, 14 years old. I've been at this stuff for a long time. It's been a huge part of my life for a long time. And this concept of hunt the wind that's good for the buck, I never could understand it, because on the other end of the spectrum, there's guys that just scream and shout, hunt the wind that's good for you. But then the guys that are killing these big giant bucks, they're saying, hunt the buck's best wind that you can just barely get away with. Now, guys like Stan Potts that I always watched, he was a big proponent of hunt the buck's wind that's just okay for you. So when I boiled all of that down, I gathered, okay, be risky, right? And I've kind of fallen into that concept, right? I never could understand, okay, how can I hunt a wind that's good for me, but also good for the buck, and still hunt my property safe and smart? Well, it's kind of a fine line there. How safe do you want to play it? I mean, you can hunt a property really safe and smart, but at the end of the day, never get a shot opportunity. Bow hunting, there's a fine line between playing it too safe and getting an opportunity. So over the years, I've come to the realization that I'd rather get an opportunity in a situation that's subpar for me than just watch a deer at 50, 60 yards, never get an opportunity, but have no clue that I'm there, right? I would rather have a buck at 30 yards that kind of understands that, I don't necessarily like something here, but I'm at full draw at that point. I would much rather have that situation than a situation that I can't do anything about, that he has no idea I'm there. That's not something that I care about necessarily. It's a good indicator that I'm doing something right, that I see a deer, and then I am getting him in a reasonably close distance. But if I can't get a shot, I didn't succeed on my mission. So basically, I wanted to kind of show you guys this setup that I kind of created to make this concept of hunting a wind that's good for the buck, but at the same time I can get away with. I want to talk to you guys about this stand in particular. Now, it's just right over my left shoulder here. It's in a pine tree. It's not a very bushy pine tree. It's not a very good tree in general, but it's the tree that I had to make work. Now, to give you the layout of this whole scenario, like I said, I'm standing in a food plot right now. This is maybe 1/8 of an acre. It's not big, but it has highly attractive forage in it in the fall time. It draws deer. On the other side of things, about 75, 80 yards behind me, directly behind me, I've got a little bit bigger than a quarter-acre food plot. That's kind of the hub of the movement in this area. That's like my big drawing food plot. It pulls a lot of deer. I've shot multiple videos on that food plot, big primary scrape in it. It's just a food plot that pulls a lot of deer every single night. You can guarantee that if you're gonna see a deer, it's probably gonna be in that food plot. Now, what I've got going on down here, this is my bedding area. This is my bedding slope. Now, 10-ish years ago, this was logged out. A lot of oaks taken out of there. And basically this grew up really nasty. The way that it lays out, it's basically straight up and down. It's very steep. There's a couple benches in there, but there's spots where they had logged that just grew up ridiculously thick. And it's all blackberry briars, a lot of good native habitat. I've been doing some invasive control in there as well, but it's actually not very bad when it comes to that. But I've scouted this multiple years now over the winters, finding these areas that I know bucks are bedding in. You know, you can look for your typical buck bed. It's a solo bed. There's 2 or 3 or more rubs on big trees right around it, and it's tucked inside very thick cover. That's not always the case, but in this case, that's exactly what it looks like, and it's littered with them in here. Now, topography being your greatest form of cover, these bucks sit on this hillside, watch the valley below, and they take the wind at their back or quartering over their back in some shape or form. Now, to wrap this all around and together, I came to the fact that, okay, I have my ag fields here, I have my food plots here. This is a west wind coming like this. All of my bedding's right here. So these bucks are not gonna be here on anything that doesn't have a west in it, more than likely. Now they can slightly position themselves around this wrapping hillside to accommodate for a southwest blowing just over this side right here, or a northwest coming like this. They can transition and move around on this knob of this steep side hill to accommodate for those winds. But other winds, they're not necessarily gonna wanna be here. I've watched bucks sprint across this bottom field here in the past as a wind switch is happening because he didn't feel that he was in control of the situation. He didn't have all of those elements in his advantage. And he literally, during the heart of gun season, in the middle of the day, this was like 11 a.m., I watched, it was actually Baby G, I watched him sprint across that bottom field out of this bedding area just because that wind was not in his advantage. It was pretty cool to see that happen real time. But basically, I came to the realization that anything without a west in it is not gonna work here. The probability of me having a buck bedded here and then at the same time feeding in this food plot and then transitioning to this ag field during those daylight hours is not going to be high. I need something with a west in it that I can get away with in this tree stand to tip the scales in my favor and make the probability that the sit and the time that I come in here, I have a high chance of seeing a buck and getting a shot. Now this plot being so tight and small, I have a really good opportunity that any deer that steps foot in here, I can kill. And it improves it even more by having this exit route right here. There's a road that comes in right here, just in front of the stand location. And then there's a field road that runs along and connects that other food plot. Now, both of these food plots are screened from each other, and that's the sliver of timber that I'm sitting in. So I can overlook both of these food plots from this sliver of timber. I'm basically hunting just this one because the odds of those deer transitioning from that food plot on a west wind over here, probably not that high. They're probably just gonna go straight out to the beans or the corn, whatever it may be that year. But a buck that's bedded anywhere in here, his shortest line of movement is coming straight up this hill. They do it all the time. This is a stand location that I've perfected over years of scouting, years of intel, having cameras here, scouting this, and then just at the end of the day, sitting in this stand and understanding how these deer operate in this stand location on these certain conditions. Now, I'm gonna go back into a hunt that I had here. This was 3-4 years ago. I wanna say probably 2020 it was. I had a really cool sit here. I had a field full of deer. There was a ton of deer out. But it was one of those days that it had dropped 15 or 18 degrees in temperature. And this was an early October sit. So we're not really to that rut stage yet. This was October 5th to the 10th, somewhere in there. So these bucks aren't riled up yet. This was strictly hunting a food source movement. And I decided to come in here. We had beans in the field. We had beans in the ag field. I decided I got a west wind. I had a big cold front come through. I had a west wind, and I had photos of a buck that I called at the time Stronghold. He held his horns really late every single year. That's kind of the story of the name, right? But I came in here. It was one of the first years that I'd actually sat in this stand. I'd had it set up for a few years prior, but I just never really had the courage to come in here and hunt it, because being it an early October sit, I was skittish of blowing things up, blowing up a movement. Now, I would much rather hunt this spot in the morning as my thermals are coming up this hill. The best situation for this stand location is gonna be a west wind coming right to the edge of this knob, and then my thermals coming up, taking that scent right up. So any deer that's coming back here, by the time they get to my scent cone, I've got thermal wind coming up and taking it up into the airstream and out of here. That's best case scenario in this stand location. But I mustered up the courage to come in here in the evening sit. From what I could gather, it was a high priority sit. It was a highly predictable sit. I thought for sure that I was gonna have Stronghold come out. And I did. Basically, I was anticipating him bedding on this side of this ridge. So I had a straight west wind, and I'm sitting in this pine tree here. So I'm off his trail that I'm anticipating him coming up just enough. You know, he's got the wind in his face. He's coming straight up like this. He's coming up like this. I've got a west wind like this, but I'm sitting just off that trail. So I'm getting a clean west wind blowing me over the top of this, and I'm banking on him coming up this trail just like so. And wouldn't you know it had happened. I had a field full of deer. Never had any deer get downwind of me. It was a perfect scenario. He came up in this plot, but it was just too dark to shoot. He came up in here, and he got to right on this logging road that I was talking about earlier, 15 yards. I was at full draw, but he stopped right in front of this viney wall, basically, of brush. And I just could not make out his silhouette. It was too dark, and I just didn't feel comfortable making that shot. So that was the end of that story. But that was the first realization that I had that, okay, this system, this technique of hunting the wind that's good for the buck that I can get away with does actually work. Now, there's situations for this technique and to use this technique. Now, the only reason that I did this is because I had the perfect scenario here, right? I've got a stand location that's off of the main trail. I'm hunting far enough off that main trail that I think with that west wind, nothing is really gonna come behind me. I'm anticipating these deer coming up this main trail here. I'm sitting 30 yards away in a tree that is blowing my scent right over that top. And by the time he would even get near my scent cone, he's already coming up, feeding through this food plot, making his way to this ag field, and I've got an arrow in him. That's the best case scenario for this spot. Now, if he were to come kind of behind me, I'd still probably have an arrow in him. By the time he got downwind, he'd have to get back into the timber over here. Now, if he came up on this knob, which they like to do, this is one of those areas where it's a horizontal cruising trail right behind here. So during the rut, I'm gonna wanna hunt this on a morning because I know these bucks are gonna be running this edge. So if I hunt this in the afternoon during the rut, when the high probability of bucks cruising right behind here, bouncing over this ridge, probably gonna get busted because my wind isn't gonna have that thermal wind pushing up and taking it into the valley up and over them. So in the morning, perfect rut stand for that horizontal cruising trail. But for a food source movement sit, I'll take my chances on deer bedding in one specific location, not moving around a lot until that evening food source movement, and then banking on a trail that I think they're probably coming on. You know, I never had a picture of him traveling on that horizontal trail during that food source movement time. I had him coming up this old logging road that comes right up this hill under this apple tree. I had him coming out there more frequently than I ever had him coming back here. So I felt pretty confident that I could hunt this and he was gonna come out of that trail. Now, it doesn't always work out that way, but you gotta play the odds. When it comes to taking risk when you're hunting, you just gotta play the odds because you can't guarantee everything. You gotta predict and kind of anticipate what's gonna happen and hope for the best. It's not always gonna work out, but on those times that it does work out, you're gonna be ready and you're gonna be expecting that. That was kind of the first realization that, okay, I can hunt the wind that's actually better for the buck than it is me, but I can still have success doing so because that makes it a higher probability that he's gonna actually travel during daylight in the area that I want. You know, if you think about it, a big buck or deer in general, their first line of defense is their nose. So if they don't have that to their advantage, it doesn't really make sense to expect deer to move in an area that's good for you that they have no idea where any predators are at. Yeah, it might be good for you, but if they don't have any advantage or tactical advantage, safety advantage when it comes to the wind direction, it's kind of ignorant to think that you're gonna have a high quality sit and you're gonna have just this buck come wandering in because you're sitting there, you know? We have to think strategically when it comes to, okay, how can I position myself that he thinks he's getting away with everything? He thinks he's got everything locked up. Nothing is gonna get to him. How can I position myself in that specific scenario that he is not gonna get me or there's a low chance and I can get close enough to kill him? It's a chess game, guys. It's not easy. These are strategic locations that it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, a lot of scouting, a lot of intel to figure this kind of stuff out. And especially when it comes to bow hunting. You know, gun hunting, it's a different story. We have a lot longer range. We can be a little bit more sloppy when it comes to getting tight and pushing into areas because there's so much, especially in Wisconsin, there's so much pressure. These deer are not on a natural movement. But when it comes to bow hunting, and especially that bedding to food source movement, you have to be on your A game. During the rut, like I said, just like gun season, you can get a little bit more sloppy. You can take some more risk because there's so many bucks moving and they're prioritizing does over safety. So you can get away with more when it comes to your wind direction, your stand location, your movement, stuff like that. But on that bedding to food source movement, you have to be on your A game. You have to be dialed in. You cannot make mistakes. Now there's circumstances that are out of your control. You know, when he stepped into that plot, if I had a swirling wind, it could have been game over. It could have been jigs up, he's gone. During the daylight on that bedding to food source movement, this spot's probably blown up for that buck in particular, especially. So that's just something that I wanted to go over is you can hunt the wind that's better for the buck than it is for you. But you have to put a lot of time and a lot of research into those stand locations. Now, we manufactured this stand location for a setup like this. I went ahead and I cut virtually all the trees on this sliver of timber. I'll throw the drone up and I'll show you guys how I kind of laid that out, but it's just a sliver of timber that separates two food plots. This food plot, other food plot, this sliver of timber. I'm sitting in that sliver, but I went in there and I virtually clear cut everything. I made a mess in there. So this sliver is basically impenetrable. These deer aren't traveling through there because if you can eliminate or get very close to eliminating deer traveling near and around your stand, you got a lot higher chance of not getting busted. When you have deer traveling 5 yards away from your stand, that's when you're gonna get busted. Or they can easily get downwind of you. That's when you're gonna get busted. So I'm trying to avoid that situation happening. I'm coming in here from this road, so by the time they even get to my boot trail, I've already got an arrow in them. And by the time they get to anywhere near the base of the tree where I'm leaving scent climbing up, anything like that, they've already got an arrow in them. So you have to think about all of this stuff when you're big buck hunting. It's not just sitting on a fence line hoping they walk by because the wind's good for you. It's putting in the work, putting in the research, scouting, understanding that, okay, I've got a west wind on a slope like so. It's perfect for a buck to bed with a wind to his back, watching the valley, got a good temp drop. There's a high probability that he's gonna show up here in daylight. He's gonna get up off his feet, he's gonna head straight into the wind, or more than like, at least quarter into it, and he's gonna think he's got all the advantage because he's not getting my wind, he's getting clean wind off this field, smells other deer up here, he's coming up from this trail, there's no scent right in front of him. The only scent is just in the sliver of timber off his trail. By the time he even gets close to that, he's got an arrow in him. So this situation worked out perfect. It just didn't work out the way I planned it. He didn't get here soon enough. Maybe if I would have gotten a little bit more aggressive, maybe come in here and hang and bang on one of these trees just inside the timber, it would have worked out a little different. I would have got to him just a couple minutes sooner, gotten an arrow in him. But that was the whole scenario that finally tripped my trigger. Like, okay, this is how we're gonna hunt from now on. This is how we're gonna think about things from now on. Because before that, I was always of the thought process that I just have to hunt the wind that's good for me and be safe. It's not the case, guys. If you have a buck doing something on a bedding to food source movement and he's doing it during daylight, pay attention to what that wind direction is. Find the spot that you can get just off that trail out of his line of travel where you can hunt that same wind and just barely get away with it. You're just off his trail, you're just off his scent cone, and get an arrow in that deer, because that's how these big bucks operate. Nose first, safety first. If you can understand how you can hunt him without getting busted yourself, you're gonna be a very dangerous predator in the woods for this fall.